think we're live. Howdy, folks. Howdy, David. Um, I'm Elliot Morris with Strength in Numbers. David, you're technically the publisher of the down ballot. Is that correct?
That is exactly right.
David is the expert on all elections that are not presidential. I think you undersell yourself by mentioning the focus on non-presidential elections because you're so good. But I have had a dream for a long time that I would have someone to nerd out with every month or every week about politics. And David decided to co host this with me. We're doing a little experiment. We'll see how this goes. And maybe it'll be a semi regular block on his calendar to take all of his precious time away. Um, we're going to talk about Trump's polls here, I guess, we didn't set a time, but maybe 45 minutes or so. We're going to talk about ICE, of course, and the 2026 midterms more broadly. David, does this sound like a plan to you?
This sounds like an excellent plan. And I think we should just jump in and talk about what we're going to talk about. So, Elliot, you every month at your site, Strength in Numbers, you partnered with a polling firm called Verisight. And you put out a poll on all of the major topics that are hitting the news right now, as well as questions that you run every single month on topics like Trump's approval and his specific approval on individual issues. And you just released your first poll of 2026 just yesterday. And the numbers are really, really bad for Trump. But it's not just that they're bad, it's that they are getting worse. And it's not just that they're getting worse on his signature issues like immigration. Overall, the top line, this really stood out to me. The top line Trump job approval, only 40% of Americans in the Verisight Strength in Numbers poll said that they approve of Trump's job performance, and 58% had a negative view. They disapproved. And that was the worst since you guys started polling. What do you make of that?
The big number I honed in on, just to add one more, is the 49-50% strong disapproval number. I think this is
Hmm.
important because it's not just that people are like dissatisfied, it's that they're actively upset, bordering on, I think, maybe we could say enraged at the current administration. Um, Look, it's -18. It was -17 before. Maybe that's a new record low. It's within the margin of error. Obviously, I think conditions have changed somewhat over the last month and a half, so I won't poo-poo too much on the movement here. Uh, but the thing that really stands out to me is what I've been saying for the last year and a half. This is not a president that has like the sanctioning of the public to lead. He does not have the consent of the governed, we might say, right now. The data keep underscoring this point on his presidency overall. And to the extent that Americans wanted anything out of this administration, it was lower prices and a secure border. They might have a secure border depending on how you define that. But everything that they're getting on prices, they're unhappy with. His approval ratings -30 in our poll on prices. Um, and the recent events on immigration are evidently turning the public against his agenda on that ground, especially in regards to deportation. So, if if our question is like, does Donald Trump deserve to be president right now, or maybe not deserve? Would people vote for Donald Trump if an election were held today? We can say no, and I think that's a pretty powerful statement, and it's the reason that data is useful in our political coverage.
So I think that we're in this very disconcerting era when you have this man in the White House who, in so many ways, acts as though he doesn't care about the polling. Now, there's no question that Trump is obsessed with polls. He pays lots of attention to them, except he just dismisses the ones that he doesn't like. And he lives in this bizarre bubble where they're all fake news and some, garbage joke poll of just Republican voters that shows him with a 95% approval rating from Newsmax, probably the Newsmax website. He harps on that and decides that that means he's actually doing great. But it is weird because we have seen it for decades and decades. I mean, honestly, since George Calif came on the scene, politicians responding to polls on a regular basis. It's kind of been internalized in American politics and foreign politics as well, that you get bad polls, you probably should think about changing the direction you're going in. And Trump just doesn't do that. He does the exact opposite of that. He leans in to the things that are most unpopular. And that's kind of bizarro world. And I think, Elliot, a lot of people conclude from that the polls don't matter because Trump doesn't respond to the polls in the way a normal politician would. But I sharply disagree with that take, and I know you do as well, because the polls matter to everyone else who isn't Trump.
Yeah. You're asking me to scoop my article for tomorrow, which is kismet. Um, I agree, right? Like maybe Donald Trump doesn't care about polls. That's not obvious to me, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't care about them. We do live in a democracy where what the people want matters. So if we're getting an overwhelming amount of polling, basically at the daily basis now, this is people don't like what they're getting on prices. They don't like what they're getting on immigration. They don't like what they're getting on deportations. I could list every single policy, basically besides border security at this point, but I won't. Then that's something that we should take to heart as lowercase Democrats or lowercase r Republicans for that matter, and demand more from our representatives. As long as you believe in what the polls are showing or the rationality of the public over the long term, then you should. I mean, this is just the whole point of my Substack. So I'm kind of on a soapbox here, but like devote yourself to giving meaning to those polls. That's what I think. But it's not obvious to me that he doesn't care about the surveys. He's making up
Yeah, I
fake
agree.
surveys all the time. What we know about Donald Trump is he's the narcissist. Those sorts of people care about what people think about them. The polls are just another way to see what people think about the president. So I do think he cares about them. Even if he didn't, they're still important, I think.
And I think lots and lots of other people care about them in different ways, including your typical politician, even if they are a hardcore MAGA Republican. I mean, yeah, sure, your some of your ultra extremists don't need to really worry about getting reelected before the general public, but you have lots and lots of Republicans who do face very difficult reelections this fall. They keep getting more and more difficult, and they definitely care about the polls, and they know that they're going to be in trouble if things don't change for them. And right now, there's no reason to think that there is. And of course, for your Republicans, say in a swing district or in a swing state, your Susan Collins of the world or Mike Lawler in the House in the Hudson Valley in New York. They are trapped, and I have zero sympathy in the world for them, but they are trapped between Trump being this anvil for them, and also being afraid of pissing off Trump and bringing down his wrath upon them and potentially alienating the MAGA voters that they need to show up in order to win. The other set of people, so that they have this difficult tightrope to walk. The other set of people who I think the polls matter to are the general public, because man, I mean, Elliot, I remember all too well, in the lead up to the Iraq War, when the polls were showing Bush with 90% approval following 9/11, and if you opposed the march to war, you felt like you were taking crazy pills. And it took a long time before Bush's polls changed. And when they did, that led to Democrats having this huge sweep in the 2006 midterms. Now, I think it strengthens ordinary people to see just how unpopular Trump is. And that's whether you're showing up to a No Kings March or you are bird dogging ICE in the cities where they're terrorizing civilians. Knowing that you're not alone, I think, is just so, so important in a democracy.
Yeah, one thing that you and I talked about, we were thinking about how to structure, I think, these conversations that we should share with people is that we're coming at our coverage of politics from a specifically pro democracy view because, like, why would you cover politics and elections if you didn't believe in democracy? Maybe you could do that from the far right anti democracy point of view, but we don't. So if that's true, then yeah, there's strength in the numbers, but only if we give it to those numbers. Um, I do like your point that maybe I'll just repackage.
Yeah.
People beyond Donald Trump matter in politics. So I get a lot of backlash uh, online. People say, "Oh, Donald Trump doesn't care about his approval rating," but senators, Republicans running in close states, care about Donald Trump's approval rating because that's a proxy for who's going to vote for them if they're going to have an easy time being reelected. Equally, Democrats that are running for election in close Senate races or close House races should care about it also. It's a signal to how much distance they can add between themselves and the current administration's policy. So, so yeah, I guess there's a lot of other reasons why we should care about polls besides the usual tired line that Donald Trump doesn't.
So I want to talk more about your new poll, in particular, the unbelievable interactive tool that you just unveiled today that uses all of your polling that you have conducted with Verisight to date. And I think it is fair to say, I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to hedge this in any way, shape, or form. You have created the most granular map of Donald Trump's job approval possible anywhere. We've never seen anything like this. So yeah, no,
Yeah, for a public product, public product, absolutely. Yeah, I know the campaigns have better stuff, but
do they though? But
whatever votes.
Elliot, I get to be the proud proud parent, as it were, and sing your praises. But tell us about the new interactive and how it works and how you built it.
You can be the hype man. That's good.
That's right.
Yeah, look, we interview about 2,000 people every month. We being Strength in Numbers and Verisight. We ask them a lot of stuff like beyond how do you feel about Donald Trump. So that's just the first thing that we've produced. Hopefully, I'll be able to do a lot more work on this. But yes, it is for people who have not seen it. A PUMA level, a PUMA. It's a census designation that's smaller than the counties in the cities. So you can really see, like, if you're in a city, what your neighborhood thinks of politics. In this case, what they think of Donald Trump. And we generate this by taking all of the interviews we've done so far, just about 12,000 people since last May, and we run it through some fancy statistical algorithms that figure out what types of people approve of Donald Trump, like what your demographic traits are, of course, what your partisanship is, or specifically how you voted in the last election, and also the influence of where you live. If it's a poorer place, a whiter place, if it's a more Democratic or Republican place, that also impacts how you feel about politics, not just your own identity, but the circumstances around you. This is, of course, the left behind theory from the 2016 campaign. So there's lots of theoretical reasons we should expect that to matter. Anyway, because we also know like what types of people live in certain places of the country because of the Census Bureau, we can predict how those people would behave based on the survey data. So we map the survey data onto the public, and it's like 3 or 4 months of work. So I'm not just going to say it's magic. There a lot of work happens behind the scenes, but it is somewhat magical to be able to look at, like, there's 4 Puma districts in my neighborhood, so I can see what different parts of my neighborhood, what the model at least thinks that my neighbors think, and that allows us to give more voice to the public, hopefully. But I think the real reason people click on it is just because they like maps. It's just a pretty cool map.
It is an incredibly cool map, and also you created a cartogram version which shows each of these pumas, these local areas, by size, so that the map doesn't get dominated by, as you put it, sagebrush. Elliot, I'm curious, what's the Trump job approval in your neck of the woods?
I'm sure people could guess. I live in a city, so it's going to be less than 25%. But the question I will actually ask the audience, if you can look at this while you listen to us, go find the most anti-Trump Puma in the entire country, and then go find the second most. These are in very different places. It was fun. I'm not going to reveal the answer, and I'm not going to tell people where I live either. So nice try, David.
Well, you can find the new interactive. It's the top post at gelliottmorris.com. And I always have to say this, there's 2 L's and 2 T's in Elliot.
That's
a lot
right.
of ways to spell Elliot, but there's only one way to spell G. Elliott Morris. gelliottmorris.com. It's the top post there. It has a great explanation and links out to this interactive. It's super, super cool. So essentially, Elliot, are you saying that, like, you have these 12,000 interviews with Americans over the course of, half a year plus. And so you get a good sense from all these interviews of, say, for instance, how young Latino men view Donald Trump, or how non-college women might view Donald Trump. And then in each of these census areas, you know the demographic proportions that make up these regions, and then can essentially translate that polling based on demographic information into the demographics of each different geography.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's right. We have information on the number of people in America that exist in every single Puma or small county, basically, um, by their race, their age, their education, their income. There's a lot of other information, but that's what we use. And the interaction of all these things. So we know how many, white, 18 to 30, college educated men there are in Washington, D.C., Puma number 7 or whatever it is. Um, that's a random one, not where I live. And don't look that up. And you can imagine repeating that process for every single neighborhood in the country. So I think it's going to be a pretty powerful interactive. It's gotten good reception, especially on Reddit, which I'm surprised by. But I'm curious to
No
hear from
kidding.
people what they expect, like what they want out of this, because we have a lot of data, uh, and we have incredibly powerful computers now, David, that we can use to generate insights that people want. So please email me or put in our comments like the questions you have. By and large, we can answer them. I am but a vessel to deliver answers from data for my audience. So do ask. But I think it's cool. And uh, and I also hope that it's useful.
So you will also be a vessel to answer questions from me, your interlocutor. And I want to talk about the immigration numbers specifically in the most recent Verify poll. And this, I want to preface this by touching on an issue or really a framework that you have pioneered the most aggressively and have been vindicated every step of the way from the beginning of Trump's second term onward. You had a lot of folks, including many Democratic office holders in Congress, and also many pundits, including the kind of pundits that lots of Democrats like to listen to, say Democrats should not focus on immigration. That is Trump's strong suit. And if you, quote unquote, increase the salience of immigration, you'll only be doing a favor for Donald Trump. So therefore, don't talk about the issue at all. And that could not have been more wrong. And you pushed this point very, very early on. And then we saw it so vividly when Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen visited Kilmar Abrego Garcia in prison. And the news coverage was incredibly sympathetic to Abrego Garcia and to Van Hollen's mission. And Trump's numbers immediately tanked after that. And then we saw them reverse after a few weeks and a few more trips by Democrats. The issue dropped in salience and Trump's numbers bounced back. But now Trump's numbers on immigration are very, very poor. And of course, it depends on how you frame the question or how you ask the question. But what are we seeing now in the latest Verify poll on immigration and its related issues?
I'll say the other thing we did that was different was we separated out deportations as a policy and border security from immigration. I am a student of public opinion. I worked as a pollster briefly, and obviously we run this poll now. Some people will call me a pollster, but I don't know what the identity is there. Anyway, it, there are so many assumptions we make or people make when they're doing polls, and the assumption they were making here was that people will always think about border security when they think about immigration, and that they will think the same way about deportations as they do about border security. So therefore you can collapse the issue. It'd be like if you wanted to combine grocery prices and healthcare prices. We know actually people experience those very differently, and they will vote for policies uh, that are very different, and they will approve of the president in different ways depending on what policy is more salient. So I sort of staked out this ground early on. Thank you for saying I was vindicated. I do feel that way. That Donald Trump's deportation policy would end up being much more unpopular than his border security policy, because images, for example, of citizens being killed in the street or kids used to entrap parents and to kidnap children to entrap their parents and deport them would be seen as a different issue than people crossing the border. That seems self-evident to me. I know it seemed self-evident to a lot of people at the time. And so we tested it, right? I'm very blessed to have this relationship with Verisight where we can test lots of different approaches because they're very creative when it comes to their polling. So we could stake out this ground really early on in like May of last year to say, let's look at these numbers separate them out by different policy. So, and now at this point, immigration and deportations are underwater in our polling by about 8 points, 9 points. So 9 percentage points more of Americans disapprove of how Trump's handling deportations and immigration. And border security is at -1 or -2, the lowest it's been. Sorry. Border security is at +4, but crime and public safety, also an issue with ICE's deportation efforts, is at -2 or -3. Um, and they're on a downward trajectory. This is important right now, obviously, because of ICE being in the news. My theory has been that these images that are on people's TV and their social media would move the public away from the administration's position, decreasing his approval rating. And I think we're seeing the beginning of that, but I don't think we're seeing the end of that. There's no sign, maybe to go back to a bit of what we were talking about in the previous segment, there's no sign that Trump's really relenting in his deportations campaign. The only way that the policy will stop is if funding is rescinded, which could happen by Democrats depending on what they think the optimal strategy is with the next shutdown. But they're still going to have $1.5 trillion ICE budget, right? So it's really at Trump and Stephen Miller's behest. I don't think they're going to change course. So I think we'll be getting more of the same. And I think the numbers will continue to trend down for the president, if I had to guess.
I want to zoom in on something in particular that you said. You talked about that deportations are, Trump is at -8 in terms of his approval rating on handling deportations, but was still +4 on border security. So we're talking about a gap of around a dozen points if you uncollapse these issues. And that's really, really fascinating to me because I think that there is a tendency not to. I think we really saw this, especially in 2024. Just people looking at the broadest possible types of issue polling with insufficient nuance. But if you had any sophistication at all, you would know that the images that we have seen and the effects that we have seen of, for instance, the mother who has been working in the community for 20 years and maybe her paperwork wasn't quite sorted right and she gets taken away in the middle of the night and everyone loved the local restaurant that she ran, that people, even people who normally are very conservative and very much sympathetic to Donald Trump, that those sorts of people would have a problem with that. And yeah, it's upsetting that such people voted in the man who would implement these kinds of policies, even though lots of folks tried to warn them. The images from the border and the images from your own hometown are just two totally different things. And in a way, when you step back, it's almost a little bit remarkable that so many folks in politics have a hard time grasping that, yeah, there's nuance, and give voters credit for understanding the nuance.
Well, what I really like about what you and I do is that we take a numbers first approach to covering politics, and we don't have to get caught in all those traps, our ideological priors,
Yeah.
what our friends on the Capitol are trying to do and how we can help them. And that frees us up to come to conclusions like immigration policy as an umbrella contains lots of smaller policies that could change how people care about immigration. I don't know if you were referencing someone in particular. There is a woman named Carol Hui from, I think, Kennett, Missouri, who was deported in the exact scenario you described, the sort of local mom that worked at a diner and was captured by ICE in the middle of the night in Trump country. And her neighbors, Trump voters, said, quote, "We did not vote for this." I saw that happen in June last year and said, and just sort of, I thought and I wrote and I said, maybe the assumption that immigration policy is good for Trump is wrong because, look, in reality, it looks like that assumption is wrong. A lot of people dug their heels in, but I think we're seeing over the last couple of months that prediction was correct.
So speaking of nuance and polls, this gets to sort of almost meta issue regarding polling. And you had this interesting exchange with actually Chris Hayes from MSNBC on Blue Sky, where Chris Hayes was pointing out that Trump is much more underwater on things like inflation and the cost of living and prices. Some of the other set of issues that were most salient in the 2024 campaign. whereas the numbers are negative for Trump in many respects on immigration and deportations, but not quite as negative. And so it's easy to look and say, oh, if Trump is say -5 on one issue and -25 on another issue, well, Trump's opponents, in this case the Democrats, should focus on the issue where he's -25. But there's another issue that many polls really struggle to get at, which is the intensity with which voters have feelings about particular issues. And yeah, inflation obviously got a lot of people quite upset heading into the 2024 election, and people are still upset about it. But I think that there is a great possibility that even though the polls are more closely divided on immigration, that the folks who are upset are way, way, way more intensely upset, and that you can't conflate the gap on an issue with the intensity behind it.
Yeah, there was a great CNN survey directly answering this question, or it gives us a direct answer from last week. It asked voters who disapprove of Donald Trump to, in their own words, describe why. And in that experiment, the same percent of people said immigration as said, or said deportations in particular, as said any economic issue in general. And if you combine that with stuff like civil rights or democracy or like safety, then the percent of Americans who care about, let's just call it the impacts of Trump's deportation agenda, is much higher than the percent of people who said that they disapprove of Donald Trump because of prices. So I don't actually know what the answer is. If our question is what should Democrats campaign on to decrease Trump's approval the most, presumably that gives them the best chance to win the election. We have some evidence that says maybe it's prices because that's his lowest number. But we have a lot of other contradictory evidence that says inflation or sorry, immigration's moving a lot of people, including independents and Democrats. So maybe you want to focus there. Actually, the argument I would make is that there's a lot of different paths Democrats could take to weaken Trump because the executive overreach has been so severe on pretty much every issue. And shoehorning yourself into one policy area that you think is the best, putting all your eggs in that basket might not be good. It's probably not a good strategy. Um, that's that's my thought. If I'll add one more thing,
Yeah.
people use the polls here, I think, too overconfidently. They say, "Oh," and this is just a constant problem in Washington. They say, "Oh, more people care about the economy." 35-40% of people say their number one issue right now is the economy. Only 12% say immigration. So let's just talk about the economy. But those numbers are downstream of what politicians are talking about, so they can't
Hmm.
be changed. And they're asking a different question than I think the question we are asking and that voters are asking themselves, which is what do I care about? What am I reacting to? Not what is the most important problem in the country, but what do I care about the most? What has pissed me off the most? What do I like the most about the current administration? Um, so there's this tendency to glob onto a number that seems clear in Washington, but if I can put on my like pollster hat, maybe my political psychology hat, there's not a lot of evidence that those very clean answers are giving us actionable insights about the world. So this is an argument from nuance, maybe.
Uh, uh,
But what do you think about the current ICE administration or the current Democratic response to ICE?
I want to answer that by touching on a completely different issue, which is guns and gun safety and regulations on guns. And for the longest time, when you ask people in polls about some of the most common sense gun safety measures, like instituting background checks for all gun buyers. That's usually the number one. It tends to get 80% support in the polls. And yet, outside of some blue states, it has failed to pass universal background checks, including in Congress. There was a big attempt a number of years ago led by Joe Manchin, and it failed. And it's quite remarkable when you think about it. How can an issue that's 80-20 fail so hard time and time and time again? And I point to intensity behind the pro gun side, that the people who oppose things like background checks oppose it with the intensity of a thousand suns. And the people who support background checks, they certainly care about it. But they're just not driven in that single issue way, and they don't view it as this existential issue, really, that so many of the most intense gun owners and gun lobbies view gun issues with. And so
Hmm.
that's why we still don't have universal background checks in this country. Um, I think that right now there is an intensity that is way, way higher and much broader than the opposition to things like background checks among folks on the left, and not just on the left, but among folks who oppose Donald Trump when it comes to immigration. And I think that Democrats are in Congress, many of them are making a mistake by not trying to tap in to that intensity. And by what you were saying earlier, Elliot, about sort of almost getting locked in or backed into thinking that there's just this one issue, this one kind of magic issue. It's kind of like the Chuck Schumer way and the Hakeem Jeffries way of like always wanting to relentlessly focus on prices and great message discipline, but you can do two things at once. And I think it would be a real mistake to say to all the people who are putting their lives on the line, literally putting their lives on the line to prevent ICE from terrorizing and kidnapping people, to say to these people, well, that issue is not really what we want to talk about. We only want to talk about prices. Talk about both. Talk
Right.
about how you are going to end this fascist assault on our cities and lower prices. You can absolutely do both.
I agree with you. You can walk and chew gum at the same time, is what I've said before. It seems like that's true in politics too. There's this assumption that you have a certain amount of messaging you can put out into the
Mhm.
world, but it does seem like with social media that that is pretty much infinite, the amount of messaging you can put out.
Yeah, yeah.
Donald Trump campaigned on like 20 issues at the same time. Democrats should be trying to do the same, especially when every issue now tilts in their advantage. Just say that. How is that not a powerful message? No, I asked this question to Democrats on the other side of this sort of strategy debate from us all the time, and I never get a persuasive answer to the
Yeah,
to the question, why can't we just run on two things at once?
I think that Donald Trump. I don't think we know that Donald Trump has a unique ability to command media attention in the way that no other politician, no political party ever possibly could, or at least right now. And so Donald Trump could put it out there that he's going to make IVF free. Total lie, totally impossible. It gets media pickup. It affects some voters, and then he moves on to the next thing. It's certainly more difficult for Schumer and Jeffries and the Democratic Party, which is really such a broad and vague term, to get traction. But it can be more than one. It doesn't have
Right,
to be 20
right.
like Donald Trump. And I guess it also really vexes me, Elliot, because after 2024, and Democrats doing all these, postmortems and self-flagellations, one phrase that you hear a lot is meeting voters where they're at. Well, that can't just apply to the folks who didn't vote for you. That also has to apply to the folks who either did vote for you or who might want to vote for you but were disinclined in 2024. And so, if you want to meet folks where you're at, then this incredibly intense anti-ICE segment of the American public, meet them where they're at and say that you see them and that you appreciate their sacrifice and what they're doing to try to stop this, and that you're going to try to stop it too.
There's a problem Democrats have too, that none of the strategy advice to just stick on prices solves, which is that few Americans feel that Chuck Schumer, in particular leadership, let's just say, cares about them.
Yeah.
They don't feel like they represent them or care about their struggles. Um, and this is a personality problem. This is hard to say, but this is just Chuck Schumer. It's just Chuck Schumer being Chuck Schumer
Yeah.
that they don't like, and they don't feel like you know, he's representative of them and he doesn't connect with them. And I don't have any personal, maybe I do have some personal gripes, but I'm not coming from that angle here. If you ask people to rate every politician in America on a scale from 0 to 100, from not favorable at all to maximally favorable, right? At the top of the end, you get Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders. In the middle of the list, the middle, you get Donald Trump and JD Vance. And at the bottom of the list, at like an average rating of 25, is Chuck Schumer. He gets a below 50-50 rating among Democrats, independents, and Republicans. Um, so let's just think about what how people are going to react, how swing voters are going to react to that person being essentially the mouthpiece for Democratic strategy in 2026. Maybe it's just not going well for personality reasons and has nothing to do really with political or policy content at all. At least I think that's a possibility that these people should address. Can I change our topic though? Because you
Go ahead.
said something to me recently that I thought was really interesting. And actually, we've butted heads about this before as
A little
well.
bit.
So we could put a little bit of tension here in our conversation. That's always good. It's the recipe for good writing, they say. It's just about Trump's comments about canceling the midterm elections.
Yeah.
To put the cards on the table. I've said before, it doesn't seem like there's anything stopping him at this point in terms of court orders or control over the National Guard, for example, from deploying troops right before the midterms and intimidating voters. I think you agree with that, but you've gone one step further and say, kind of so what? Like the election will happen anyway, I believe is your argument. Can you flesh it all the way out for us? This is
Wow.
important recently,
You
right?
you put two words in my mouth. The
Oh
so
no, okay,
what?
please.
I'm nowhere near that live
Okay, all
about
right.
this, but um, but I do think this really does matter, and let's be nuanced about it. Let's really try to unpack what this means. When people talk about Trump canceling the midterms, it almost sounds like they're saying that there's some button that he can press that means the elections don't happen, and that presumably he stays in power, but he's not on the ballot. So what happens next is usually not very clear in these arguments. But the U.S. election system is so heavily distributed, and that really is different from so many other countries. And it often is a real weakness because you have thousands and thousands of election offices, usually run at the county level, that are actually carrying out our elections, and they are often overwhelmed, they are underfunded, they are, in recent years, the victims of violent threats by people instigated by Donald Trump and his supporters, and they're prone to making mistakes, just like any human is. But at the same time, it also means that it's essentially impossible for even the most vigorous autocrat to somehow take over 3,000 county election offices. And so the idea of literally halting the elections, I think that's essentially impossible. But that is different from the question you were raising, which is, what else can Trump do to try to interfere with the elections? And, can he terrorize people into not voting? Can he do that in a disproportionate way in blue areas that winds up putting the thumb on the scale for Republicans? It's not impossible. It's definitely not impossible, and we know we've seen that so vividly with the way that ICE and the National Guard has been deployed to so many cities. What we haven't seen yet, though, is whether that would actually have an impact on voting behavior. I think that Democrats would be very, very wise to return to the 2020 COVID era playbook and encourage people to vote early and vote by mail precisely to avoid this problem. But also, we've seen ICE operate and the National Guard, in a few cities at once, and often, wrap up shop, pull up stakes, and move on to the next place. Making a massive nationwide deployment into many, many cities. I think that is just exceptionally difficult. Again, you can't put it past him, but we just don't know whether that would actually stop people from showing up to vote. And Elliot, I think there's a possibility that it could engender so much anger that you wind up with a surge in turnout. And the reason why I say that is because we have seen in elections over this past year, we have seen incredibly high turnout in some of them. Particularly, I'm thinking about the Tennessee 7th District special election, which had midterm level turnout, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race last April. And there's another one coming up this April, by the way. And so that's all in opposition to Trump. All that massive turnout has been generated because people are so upset by Trump. So if Trump does something so visible and so vivid and so anti-American, yeah, I think it could backfire hugely.
Let me ask you a follow-up question. Um,
Sure.
the counter argument I hear to your counter argument is, what if Donald Trump directs his ICE goon squad to capture the ballots from a polling place, or from 4 or 5 polling places in downtown, um, uh, assuming let's just assume Iowa is competitive, downtown Des Moines, and that's the 51st Senate seat Democrats need, and the ballots disappear. Uh, I think I know what I would say in response to that, but I'd like to hear what you would say.
We're getting very far afield from the democratic experience, and it becomes very difficult to answer those questions with any certainty. So, as you like to point out, with polling, polls have a margin of error. Well, when we ask these kinds of hypotheticals that have never really come up before in modern America, there's huge error bars around them because it's just
Yeah.
becomes more and more difficult to predict what might happen. Um, you know, I think that the problem here for Trump, let's say he does that, is that he doesn't know how the courts are going to react. And so you say, well, okay, fine. Let's say a district court or a state court, says this is not okay, and the election results have to be suspended pending a special election because ICE simply destroyed these ballots in Des Moines.
Yeah.
Maybe it gets all the way up to the Supreme Court. And does the Supreme Court greenlight that? It's not impossible. And that really spells, in an important way, a functional end of American democracy, because the way I'm interpreting democracy here is that the party in power, despite its depredations, can still lose power. And that has been the case over the past year. We have seen Republicans lose election after election, and that's still very much possible in 2026. If there are institutions that decide to truly and literally rig the elections, then we might be looking at a post-democratic world. But my counter would be to say, why hasn't he tried that already?
This is this is sort of what I was thinking. In 2025, why was there not a ballot snatching from counties in Virginia, for example? It probably would not have made a difference, right? But that would have been the testing ground for this strategy. But I think another good point is that he's not acting, right? Like he's going to cancel the midterm elections. He clearly wants to because he doesn't believe in democracy. I think he knows he's unpopular. So this is a manifestation of his fighting to retain power, or sort of imagining that he could retain power despite the electoral political backlash against him. But they're doing a campaign. They're obviously acting under the pretenses in which they think that they have to have elections to hold power, and that's not giving them any credit. But maybe that will pour. Maybe we should pour a little cold water on the idea that he actually could cancel the election. Obviously, it matters that he wants to, but maybe he can't.
I think what you just said right there at the end is really, really important, and we are going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. I think people so often conflate what Trump wants or says he wants or what he says he will do with what he actually can do. But we've seen a trillion times that Trump says all the time, "Oh, I'm going to do X, Y, Z," and he simply can't. He maybe passes some executive order and absolutely nothing happens as a result. And so I don't want to sound blithe. There is a lot he can do to mess with the elections, but I think your point is a really good one. Why did he kick off these redistricting wars? If Trump wasn't worried about losing the midterms, and just yesterday, the New York Post had this article which made me laugh, reporting that Trump is supposedly planning a presidential style campaign year ahead of the midterms where he's going to be doing a million rallies and I guess going to all the competitive races and states and to try to juice turnout. And it's like I think if you're the Democrats, like, all right, buddy, don't threaten
Right,
me with a good time.
right.
He's still not going to be on the ballot and he's still unpopular. And I also really question whether he has the vigor and the energy to really do another presidential style campaign. But the real point is, why would they even be contemplating this if they didn't think there were going to be elections that they might lose?
I think that the strategy here from Trump is born of a smart insight, which is that the non-voters in recent elections have leaned or lower propensity, lower turnout voters have leaned toward Trump. So you want to give them a reason to turn out. And I think that's basically the only information that they really internalized when they were crafting this strategy. Or maybe this is the best they can do with a bad hand. Because Democrats knew this in 2010 and 2014. They didn't really want Barack Obama out there campaigning.
No.
And if your president is minus 20, you really don't want him out there reminding all of the swing voters and, to your point earlier, the really, really energized Democrats of what his administration has been like so far. If there was a good argument for the administration on prices, I can maybe see how this would make sense, but it just seems dumb, right? It just seems stupid, but they have billions of dollars, so maybe they think that this is the only thing that they can do. You mentioned special elections. I know we have to go. You want to go. Um, I saw this tweet this morning. I just wanted to ask you about this.
Yeah,
'Cause you're the special elections guy, David. You're the special elections big board guy.
that's right.
I saw this tweet this morning that said Democrats in December 2025 had been doing 18 percentage points better in their special elections than they did in those districts in 2024. D plus 18 swing. And in January, the swing was only 7 points or something so far. I don't know if this was made explicit, but the implicit, obviously, argument is that something has changed, or maybe something's changed. Look at this number, like this is bad news for the Democrats. I think this is BS. I think you think this as well. Can you spell this out for us?
Yeah, it's totally BS for a really, really simple reason. Small sample size. When we look at special elections, we deliberately try to gather as many as possible, as many fit a reasonable analytic framework that allows you to compare the special election results to the presidential results in the same district. And so, I mean, January is not even over yet. We still have some more special elections this month. There have only been 10 specials so far in January. In all of 2025, we had 67. There are more special elections than that. Not all of them qualify. For instance, like a special election might be uncontested or only have Republicans running, whatever. But D versus R special elections, we had 67 in 2025. And that's a healthy number. That's actually tied for the biggest since we've been tracking this over the last decade. So yeah, don't freak out about small changes based on small sample sizes. The average Democratic overperformance in the special elections is still D plus 13. In other words, Democrats are performing on average 13 points better in those districts compared to the presidential results in those same districts. That's a really good number. Will it mean a Democratic landslide in 2026? I'm not ready to go that far, but it's not good news for Republicans.
I'll give a task to anybody out there who wants a story, right? Just what is the average Democratic overperformance by month over the last 9 months or so? I bet it's different every month.
I'm sure. Yep.
I'm
Absolutely.
sure it goes like this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, okay. Well, this was great. Maybe we can call this next time Elliot and David interview each other.
That's right.
So thank you to my audience, David. Thank you to yours also. And maybe we'll do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're a reader of the Down Ballot and somehow you have not yet subscribed to Elliot's newsletter, go to gelliotmorris.com. Again, 2 L's, 2 T's. Subscribe to Strength in Numbers. It's a phenomenal newsletter. And as you've heard from this conversation, Elliot really looks past the conventional wisdom and tells you what the numbers are actually saying, not what pundits stuck in their priors, as it were, want to believe it's saying. And if you are a reader of Strength in Numbers and want to
Out of
learn
my
more,
line, David.
no, I got it here, buddy. If you're a reader of Elliot's site and you want to learn more about all the elections that are on the ballot this year and in coming years, check out the Down Ballot, the-downballot.com. We come out every weekday morning at 8 Eastern. And yeah, I look forward to doing this again sometime, Elliot.
I don't know how you write that much. Okay, thank you.